a whole tray of dried fruits. Dates, almonds, apricots, little tray with a tiny little white fork, and olives, lots of olives. Maybe a little cheese plate. When I was a kid, I took it for granted. I was like, this is boring. Why do we have to have these ugly dried up fruits? I mean, I ate them, I liked them, they were familiar, but when I went to like my other friends' houses for celebrations and stuff, they'd have like a big bowl of Ruffles potato chips and sour cream and onion dip and celery with cream cheese and all these cool little things. Or at my family's house, it was like dates. Oh, dates, I hate dates. My grandparents and my great-grandparents always had rosemary, lemon, orange, oregano, basil in their garden. Just something you had. I thought everybody did. Lots of mint. Oh my gosh. I just grew up on mint. I love it. And when I was a kid, you know, there were a lot more people who had immigrant grandparents and great-grandparents. It was more common. And we all had our neighborhoods. And my great-grandparents and grandparents lived in what they called Little Portugal. And it was where all the people who immigrated from Portugal lived. They gathered there, and they would get together in somebody's garage in the summer and can fruit. They all worked at the canneries downtown, you know, did kind of jobs that were a little bit more labor intensive. And this is another thing I thought everybody did. When I was a kid, we didn't do it as much as I guess my mom did when she was a kid, but I thought it was an outing. I didn't realize when I was a kid what it really was. We would spend the weekends picking fruit. And now I take my kids to do it at a U-Pick farm, and I actually pay for the fruit. We go out there, we pick it, they weigh it, and then I pay them money. But when I was a kid, we would go out and spend the whole weekend at a farm picking plums or apricots or whatever, and they would add up the containers that we picked, and we would get paid for it. The kids didn't get paid. The kids were just there because they didn't have a choice. But it was a way to earn a little extra money back then. And I didn't know that it wasn't just a fun day out. I thought it was fun. We just ran through the fields. We got filthy. We climbed trees. We picked fruit. My grandmother or my great-grandparents would pack a little lunch for us. It was terribly hot. We didn't care. It was just something that they did. And a lot of people have weird feelings about, you know, people who immigrate, who stay in their own communities or create little communities. And I understood it back then because everybody spoke the same language. Everybody knew somebody that somebody else knew. And there wasn't a lot of classism, you know. You didn't have a job that was considered very meaningful or important to the rest of the world. You know, you were just there trying to get by, trying to make a living, trying to feed your family. And there wasn't any shame in it because everybody that you were around was doing the same thing, working in the same places, having the same struggles. And everybody shared in that. And there was a lot of front yard parties, a lot of backyard parties, a lot of barbecues, canning parties, and church events. They were all Catholic, and they belonged to this hall, and they would have these fiestas all the time, these Portuguese fiestas. One of my favorite things from my childhood. And I'm going to be grumbly right now and say I do not like the way this red is painting today. It's just not doing its sticky thing. It's making me mad. That's okay. It'll just have to have another layer. So when I'm done with all of the shading and creasing, and the baby looks nice and pink and weird, like it's got a really bad sunburn, I make it even more weird, and I put some red modeling. My red modeling is kind of pinky. I think it could stand to be a little more pink, but I'll use up all this, and maybe I'll try a different color next time. Yeah, so they would have these Portuguese fiestas, and they'd have all this music from Portugal, and people would dance, and the old people would teach the young people these crazy dances, and it would be so much fun. They would serve these lunches that was called sopas, and it is basically a beef stew, a very thin beef stew. It has a thin broth, lots of mint in it, carrots, potatoes, probably a very cheap cut of beef that would just fall apart because it had been cooking for so long. And you would get a big piece of French bread, kind of stale. It's hard, stale. And then you'd put it in your bowl, and you'd go past the person who would serve you the sopas, and they'd get this ladle, and they'd ladle in like 2 big ladles full, making sure that you got some carrots and some potatoes and some herbs and a few bits of meat, and it would all go on top of the bread, and the bread would just get crazy soggy with the broth. And I can't even explain how satisfying a meal that is. And later in the night, they would have a carnival, and it would be to raise money for the church. And they would have all these carnival games, and the prizes, this is kind of funny. Gosh, I feel like I'm a million years old. But the prizes would be things that nuns made. Remember, this is all kind of a Catholic thing. And back then, they had nuns, and they had nuns who were in residence. And they would make little doilies and little dolls and all kinds of little things. And then there would be like jars of pickled beans, these really homemade things. And these were the presents that you would get. They'd have a cake walk, and you'd get these little pastries and stuff. Kids loved that. I loved that so much. Go home with all those little pastries. And all the carnival games were, you know, pop the balloon and all that kind of stuff. But all the prizes were things that were made. I thought that was so beautiful. And my great-grandparents were very generous when it came to their church. They would spend it up, and then they'd have a bingo, and then they'd have, later in the night, they would have linguiça rolled in dough. So it'd be a big thing of linguiça this big, rolled in fresh homemade dough that would be baked, and they'd have trays and trays of it and big buckets of mustard. The linguiça wrapped in the dough would have all this flour on top from when it was baking. And so people would walk around, and they'd have like flour on their face from biting into their linguiça. And they'd eat these, I think they're called lupini beans. They're these little yellow beans that kind of pop out of their shell. I hated them as a kid. Oh my gosh, still thinking about them. Oh, I'm not a lima bean person or a fava bean person. But I mean, it was just such simple pleasures and so much fun. It was very traditional. They brought things from what my great-grandmother would call the old country, and they brought it here. And that was family is everything. And it was, because that's all you had, you know. If you were lucky to have a couple of cousins and your kids and your grandkids, I mean, that was it. That's all you had. And so those bonds were super, super tight. And every Sunday we had meals with my, I'm sorry, I'm chatting while I'm looking for the limbs to that poor baby. And in case you're wondering why I'm looking at the underside, it's because I do 5 babies, so I mark the inside of the flange. So all of the babies from this kit have these little purple lines. And so that's what I was looking for. Anyway, so family was like #1, super important every Sunday without fail. No excuse. Wouldn't even think of it. Look forward to it, actually. We went to either my grandmother's house or my great-grandmother's house for spaghetti dinner. And my grandfather made the spaghetti. That was his specialty. He smoked a huge cigar. He used to cook for the Navy, so he was used to cooking in great big portions. And we had spaghetti and homemade French bread and a big salad. And my great-grandmother had this great big salad bowl, huge. And she'd make the salad, and before she made the salad, she'd rub the inside of the bowl with fresh garlic, and then she'd rub it with olive oil before she put the lettuce in. And you know, it was just a regular salad, but it was just so delicately flavored with that garlic. I just remember watching her rub the clove of garlic around inside that salad bowl. I don't do it. I should. I don't know why I don't do it. That's such a precious memory. And that's what we did. It was important. And if you were late, you were in trouble. My mom was always late. My mom was the black sheep of the family, my biological mom. She was an absolute shit disturber idiot, but they put up with her because no matter what she did, she was still their family. Nowadays, we would call them enablers, but back then, it was just family. She's a crazy Elisabetta. So they put up with her, mostly because they loved us. They gave me a lot of really wholesome memories. Anyway, I am going to finish up these feet. I do not like the way this red is working, but I'm just going to power through it because sometimes things just aren't perfect, and that's the way they are, and sometimes down the road it all makes sense. So I'm just going to keep going with it. I don't want to switch gears in the middle of this baby, but I won't use this red for the next baby. I don't know what it is. Maybe my ratio is bad with the thinner. Sometimes you get it spot on, and sometimes you just miss the mark just a tiny bit. I mean, it's not horrible. Look, it's not bad. Anyway, I think I will turn off the camera, finish getting this baby pink, start getting some babies in the oven, start doing some other layers depending on what those babies need. Some babies will get some milky flesh layers. Some babies will just get some brown washes. And then after that, I'll do a bunch of little details, and I'll just keep chatting. And if the chatting annoys you, my apologies. Just turn the volume off, and you can speed through this if you'd like to. There we go. Yeah, this isn't bad. I mean, you know, it's all right. I love baby feet. All right, guys. We'll see you in a little bit.